wonderful time. And all throughout this thing, from the very beginning, I had a procedure which I always used when I composed, wrote poetry. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that any of these are any good at that time, but certainly I was doing them and I was loving doing them. But I had to have one thing. I didn't know what it was called except a sketch. I would always start what is called top down. I always started with the plan of what I was going to do, and then work my way slowly down. And I would program that way, which, by the way, in Lisp is and in other types of programs, is a really sort of wrong way to do it if you're a beginner, in the sense that if you start bottom up, you're starting with the small little functions that can take you a certain way, then stop because it needs another function above it. But you can test them all. And so you know that when, in all probability, if you're testing all along the way, your program will work at the end. Where with top down, you're writing the top level program, and none of the functions that are inside of it will work. And you have to go down and slowly do it. And the only time you can test it is when you've done it, and you absolutely know it's not going to work. And but I stayed with top down. I mean, I really loved that approach. And so every one of my compositions, even when I was below the teens, was written as a kind of sketch of some sort to give me an impression of the work. And then I'd work my way. And the last things I would do would be adding notes. That was when I didn't have a computer back in the 1950s. And this top down, I still do it. I mean, I still start with a sketch. I start with something that will give me a feeling like there's a work there that I'm writing, I'm composing, and that, that even though I can't maybe sing it per se, I can at least fake it enough that I can know how long something might be, what it kind of is during that particular section. Even the symphonies I was writing were that. And by the way, I've written a lot more than 9 symphonies, but I've thrown probably 25 of them away because they weren't, in the end, good, and at least as far as I was concerned. So I had this approach, and I have the one thing I did in preparation for this was, excuse me, just a second. Here's the beginning of such a sketch from, I suppose, I guess it would be from your left and right. You can sort of read it. It's not very close, but it's something that gives me a certain amount of time. It's the first movement of a violin concerto I've been commissioned to do, and so I'm laying it out now. I've only got through the first, maybe third of the first movement, but I know how that sounds, even though there's not a note in it. But I'm not talking about singing or playing all of the notes. I'm really talking about dynamics. Dynamics are my favorite aspect of composing. You can make anything happen with dynamics. Anyway. So
now, if I have a quick question. If we,
sure.
If we think of, your work as being a sort of algorithmic composition, would you consider these sketches, are they intuitive completely, or is there some process by which you develop them, or is it vary from work to work?
Well, it does vary from work to work, but basically my algorithm is the drawing. I didn't know the word back then, algorithm, so I didn't know what to call it that until I got to, in 77 or 78 or somewhere around in there, I received the word algorithm, and I've used it ever since. I miss somebody else who had their hand up. I think it was Mike Coggins who's left to get a cup of coffee. So, or something else, or maybe he was just discouraged. I'm sorry. Please apologize to him for not answering his question.
For me, I've always been sort of intrigued at the balance that one can strike between using your sort of musical intuition and employing your algorithmic gizmos to help. And I'm just wondering if you have changed your attitude toward that over the course of your career and a trajectory. Is this something you might vary from work to work, or is it something that stayed pretty stable across your career?
Well, originally, Emmy was supposed to, Experiments in Musical Intelligence was a program I spent, quite a long time writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and hopefully getting things somewhat right according to what I feel about it. In any event, when I would do one of those, it has a particular job, and that is to work with various styles and see if it can take a composer's music and essentially learn the style enough that it can create another piece of music in that style, and a convincing one. And I did that because I had a composer's block for an opera in 1980, and it failed. I mean, I lost my, up until that particular point in my life, I was, again, arrogant enough to myself, not visibly to others particularly, I hope not at least, that I needed something to help me through this composer's block. And so I thought the best thing to do was to use my my understanding, let's put it that way, of AI and various aspects of AI. Oh, and by the way, when I was taking those classes at Stanford in the morning, very early morning, we each got a room of somebody, and my room was John McCarthy's room. I don't know if you know that name at all. But anyway, he was the inventor of Lisp and one of the inventors of Lisp, and also back in the 50s. This was in the late 70s when I arrived, and it was just, all he did was yell at me because I was taking his office and so forth. So I don't know, because he'd come in early and I'd still have the rights to his office, but I didn't keep him for long because he was a brusque man, not a mean man, but a brusque man. And I met him later in life before he died, and it was great fun to talk with him. Anyway, that's another story. What was the question again, please?
Well, let me ask you a different question, which is, like, one of the things that's interesting about a lot of your work is that, one might think, oh, algorithmic music means that you write a bunch of rules for what the music is going to be and then set it in motion. But it seems that a lot of your work is basically to query the note, where are you, and then have it tell you where it should go. Did you start the first way, or how did you come about doing it the way you did it? Was it from the AI courses?
Oh, no, not at all. It was from a long walk I took when I realized that I was failing at each one of these things and I should start thinking in a different way. It seemed to me, for me at least, that the way to get something done was to not discard all those things that I was taught. They all had usefulness for me, but that I should think for myself. And so it suddenly dawned on me very simply that not the rules, because composers didn't write they did write according to rules, but those changed all the time. So if you look at Beethoven's pieces, you'll see very different things happening in very different movements. If you look at the Piano Concerto No. 4, second movement, for example, it's an extraordinary piece, and it is so different than anything he ever did. And there's a lot of his music is that way, because he was thinking, I suppose we'd say, outside of the box, but he certainly was doing something that made a difference in what he was, what he was. That looks good. Cam, what is it, Cam?
Can you hear me?
Can you tell me what it is?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I think it's homemade chicken noodle soup.
Chicken noodle soup.
Yeah, I heard him talking. I was like, man, I'm like dead smack hungry. I'll have with some Cheez-Its and stuff. So I was like, let me just go upstairs real quick and like get this bowl.
That's great.
I didn't want to interrupt or anything. I was just.
No, that's all right, but that looks great. That really caught my attention.
I mean, you're more than welcome to have some. I don't know how I'm going to deliver this. Maybe like.
Yeah, I don't know how you're going to do that.
Or I'm sure I'll figure out some algorithms or something.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Okay. What was the question again?
So the idea of
I looked. I said, what I want. What I want is database. Is essentially have the program look at the database of music by a particular composer. Didn't matter who the composer was, and discover for itself what are the rules that are present there. Mm-hmm. And nobody that I could find anyway at that particular point in my life was doing anything like that. And I said, why not? I mean, that's the way it works. So I knew music, well, pretty damn well. And thus I was able to make that eventually work. So this took from 1980 to about 1987, about 7 years of writing this thing. And I wanted it to be written in a way that ultimately it wouldn't have to be altered in any way except in exchange of databases from Beethoven to Bach to Chopin to the composers that I liked. And it seemed to me that, a program you don't have to diddle with, and a program that doesn't take a million or billions of pass-bys to figure out what's going on. This one knew exactly what to do. And that was my doing. And the first output from that program, which took about 6 months to write, was scary, because it did sound like the composer, very seriously sound like the composer in my ears. And my ears are, I will not even put any, I will let my arrogance show a little bit here. The ingredients that the program found in that were precisely the ones that I figured, at least, were the most prominent, most interesting, the most approachable, the most easily, algorithmically defined in the program's work. So I started doing that. And my aim was never to show anybody this. It was merely to write my opera. Mm-hmm. I wanted to evaluate my music, which was rather scary, because it turned out that my music was sort of a composite of all the rest that had been that I've been using as examples, particularly Ligeti. Mm-hmm. And that was an interesting occasion when I discovered my sitting in downtown LA at the Chinese Grauman what was that called in those days? Anyway, the theater there in, I think, the third row with the screen going all around. Stanley Kubrick's 2001 with the Ligeti scores, parts of them at least. And it was really a moment of truth, if you will, that I learned that about myself, and I changed. I didn't, it doesn't, I mean, I love Ligeti, but I didn't want to write, I didn't want to copy his music. So I, changed and wrote the opera. It inspired me to write the opera. I don't know what else to add to that. Yeah.
Let me see if we can you hear me? I just want to make sure you can.
I can hear you.
In your composition, is it mostly just mostly stuff related to like strings and intervals, or is there like samples in there as well, like certain tone burst, or like say a car driving by, or anything like that per se, like anything like sound design related within your composition?
Right, it's a good question. How do I put the answer? the program spits out MIDI, and the MIDI goes into Finale, and in Finale, I do the rest.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it sounds like
yeah,
so
it doesn't
kind of like Super Collider in a sense, like how you
yeah
it's
kind of like that.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's MIDI when it comes out through almost, well, it can come out throughout everything. Everything goes through Finale first after it's done.
Yeah, but we say like we say like is it like a key ingredient, like sound design, like effects is like another key ingredient within your composition to like give it more aesthetic qualities, I would say, within your composition.
You're talking about my compositions now, not Emmy's?
Your composition, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, my compositions are really, in terms of how I write them, I still have the memories of my times taking lessons in college with everybody who was alive and willing to do it, and to make funny sounds themselves and to do all kinds of things with their instruments and so forth. I do electronic music. I don't. Well, actually, I do, but it's not my primary way of composing.
This sense or question of authorship is definitely something that I've wondered about. You said, like, are you talking about pieces by me or by Emmy, which is, of course, the software that you created? I mean, do you consider those, in effect, your compositions? I mean, have you copywritten them under your name? I mean, you are the person who devised them and brought them into the world. I would assume yes, but did you come to, did you struggle with that, or how did that evolve?
One day I was sitting in my office at the university, and a man came by my office door and handed me a large envelope and walked away. And my first thought was, well, this can't be any good. This is not going to come to a good end. So I opened up the envelope gingerly and pulled out this highly lawyer-esque kind of thing that said, you will now cease and desist to use the word EMI in anything that you do, or we will sue you. So I took it. luckily, University of California has given to every one of its faculty a certain number of hours with a lawyer for free. They will pay for it. So I went to the closest lawyer that I could find that had good whatever, good background. And he read the entire thing, asked me a couple of questions, and then said, "You would win,
Wow.
but don't do it. Because by the time you win, you will probably be dead broke, and the prize will be $1."
Whoa.
And I said, I'm not going to, I'm going to change the name.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to make friends with these people. So I wrote them back and said, listen, I don't want to tangle with you, but this is because of the EMI Corporation in Europe, which was classical music based. And therefore, it was all kinds of things they could get into. And I said, would you give me a name that I should call it? Because it stands for Experiments in Musical Intelligence. And they reply with a whole list of names, one of which was EMMY. Emmy sounds the same, but it's not the name of their company.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll take this one. Thank you very much. And then I asked them if they would, sue me if somebody else used EMI. I said, we can't do that. No, the owner of the name is you, and you're the one that's going to get it. So I changed it. So every time I mention the Emmy, I have to write it down or write it on a blackboard, whiteboard, whatever have you. I wanted that to be EMMY each time. So you won't, if you were to by chance mention it, you may do it, completely free of being sued, yeah, I won't have any repercussions as a result of it.
Mhm.
But that taught me this problem that you described, and it's very difficult to know who did what to whom in this process of imitating things. We know because I only do dead composers.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Okay. People ask me if I can do pop music. And I said, well, I could, but I'm not going to.
Mhm.
For a lot of reasons, but I'm not going to because, I usually pause and I whisper to them because and they asked, well, what does that got to do with anything? And I said, because they can sue the bejeebers off of you. And they probably will because they have lawyers of their own. So I have never done I have done a rock group, probably in the 90s. That's fairly well known, but I'm not allowed to say who.
Yeah.
And I found, as you can imagine, that pop music is very difficult, not to do necessarily, but to make it sound like what you expect to sound from a group playing that. I mean, I can't figure out how to make the words come out of, the words that are with the piece that Emmy may have done, sounding like Paul McCartney, for example, or John Lennon. They won't sound like them. So you can leave the words out, but then what do? You've got to make the drums and the everything else sound the way it does. And before you're through, you realize that I don't know what percentage, but probably 70% of what you listen to when you listen to things is the personalities of the people or personality of the person singing, saying rhythmically, whatever, is those kinds of things, and they can't be replicated, or at least have not to my satisfaction, replicated with computers. And so I don't know if I answered your question.
I
Oh,
think,
I didn't. Who gets the credit?
yeah.
Uh, I share it. Generally speaking, it says by Emmy with David Cope. So I just share the credit, and it seems to work. Nobody seems to ask that question afterwards.
And I know that you have several pieces that you've credited to an avatar named Emily Howell. Are you still doing that? And is that because of a particular iteration of process or software that you decided to do that? And are those works distinct from like what you're writing right now in some particular way?
Yes. I don't know if it's an avatar, but Emily Howell, I mean, Emmy is a word, so I mean a name. So I did Emily Howell afterwards. Emily Howell does a different tack on things, in the sense that whereas Emily attempts to mimic, if you will, the style of a composer long dead. I don't know why I keep putting that out, but it's the way it is. And Emily Howell's database is Emmy's output. So Emily Howell is sort of the child of Emmy. And in fact, all of my programs, which probably total 15 by now, capable, have women's names to them. And I don't know why, except it must be, as far as I'm concerned. So that's the first thing I do if I'm working on something, is give it a woman's name. In any event, the results of Emily Howell are not in anybody's particular style. In fact, its job was, as I saw it, to make music without style, and or with a style that's different than anybody else's.
But isn't that David Cope then?
Copy from.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, well, what's the difference between that and you then?
Actually, none.
Okay.
You actually talk to Emily Howell. It has that kind of a thing, and it learns how to talk with you after a while, and what things mean somehow, even though it's not meanings. It's really what goes after what in sentences. And you teach it its name first of all, and your name, and it can call you that, and you do that a few times so that it gets it really weighted, and you can't necessarily change it in any way, although you can change it if you're really obstinate enough to try it. But there are a number of albums out with Emily Howell involved. I'm not trying to sell anything. And they involve some very interesting electronic sounds for the sake of the sounds. So that's where I sort of do things. But I'm pretty fluent in Lisp after the number of years. God, more than 50, I guess. No, it couldn't be more than 50. No, it would be 77 to, okay, I'm not going to get my math all messed up right here on whatever, but it's close to 50 years of working with Lisp, sometimes daily, at least every week, and creating things from it. It's a wonderful. Programming is a sheer joy to me. It's not working.
So this was something that I was kind of dancing around, I think, but it seems from what you've said that this code-based approach is still part of your own compositional process. It's something that
Yes, it is.
you engage with the music with your name on it.
Yes.
And
And what I do is, well, with this, remember I showed you the sketch, you probably couldn't see much of it, but the sketch was there. I take the sketch and I immediately go to Lisp and I MIDI download to listen to it on Finale. And I basically write that little portion, this little portion, and that little portion to hear how they'll sound. And it will work for a violin if I can play it in my imaginary violin. And yeah, I mean, Lisp and I are hand in glove. Let's put it that way. And I know that it is not, there are a lot of other programming languages out there that I've worked with that have, 100 times more, 100 times the ability of ME to do anything or Lisp to do anything. And yet I still love it. It's still just fascinating to me.
I mean, I think it's your instrument. One becomes a virtuoso on one instrument usually, and so I think it's natural. But there's still people out there doing, computer music with Lisp-based software.
Oh, yes.
So it's still are definitely considered valuable, even by a much wider, contingent.
Yes, it is, and McCarthy, bless his soul, he's dead. He is he was a genius, even though he had help with the program. And yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary, it has been an extraordinary journey. Rosiek.
Oh, it's Rosie, and my last name's Kaplan, but I don't know why it came up Rosie. Rosie. I wanted to ask about your work with alternate tuning systems, how you set it there. Like, I read that you have a 33 note.
I have a what?
A 33 note octave. You work with a 33, or
oh
what?
My God, you went back in time, didn't you? Yeah.
I went to
I don't anymore. I wrote that an article, and God, that was back in 1977, I think. And I don't think I've used it yet. I mean, I was in a Harry Partch journey, if you will. If all of you know who Harry Partch was, who invented instruments and scales. But I let that be because I could only do so many things. And so, good grief. How did you find that?
That's on your Wikipedia article. I don't know who wrote it, but so you haven't integrated using alternate tuning systems into your program, or?
No.
Okay.
Mainly because it's very difficult in MIDI to do so. I can do it, but it's not easy to make that happen. And so therefore I'm really stuck with 12.
It's in here, David.
It's what?
Edition.
Oh, I wrote about it myself? Oh my goodness. That's way back there too. That must be the
edition.
What edition is it, Elizabeth?
That's the 5th edition. I also have the 4th edition, which had a black cover.
That's right.
That's what I have,
that
yeah.
one as well. I like the back photograph on that one the best too. I actually looked like a human being.
Yeah, the microtonal thing. There is, Rosie, a world of microtonal people out there. I'm on a mailing list of a bunch of them. So if you're curious, you could ping me and I'll send you that. But it is true that, there's been a lot of debate over like the influence of MIDI on music since the 1980s. And one giant aspect of it is that it assumed the equal tempered 12-note octave. And, even in the new MIDI 2.0 that they introduced recently, it's still a workaround to try to do microtonal music in MIDI. It's not natural to it. And one other thing I was wondering is that, looking at, sort of going back to the original ideas of like embedding and creating objects, software objects that are notes, that have information about what they are. I was wondering, as you try to give your notes information about where they were in a piece, in other words, like, am I a part of a cadence, or what were the ways that you gave I think you used models of existing pieces and tried to map the new piece to a model to have some kind of sense of form. Could you go any more into like, what were the nuts and bolts of, how could you do that? How could your mechanism know like it's about time for a cadence, or this is the end of the exposition, or like, how did you translate even from a model in that kind of situation?
Right. Well, first of all, while the program is getting all the rules out of the database from all of the pieces to make sure it's thorough, it takes one of them by random choice, pseudo-random choice, to analyze thoroughly from beginning to end. Take it as the model. And at that particular point, it does exactly what you saw, that the first phrase is this many beats long. It ends on this kind of a cadence. It does this one, and it goes all, laboriously through the entire piece. And then it enters that information into those notes. I mean, these are objects. So it's object oriented in a time when it wasn't necessarily that popular. And yeah, well, it was, but it wasn't as it is now, simply taken for granted that you would do that. And so each one of the notes as stored, or pitches as stored, has a rather voluminous amount of information about, one, what are the rules involving chord to chord, if you will? What are the rules regarding, chord to the cadence? What are the rules regarding, if this particular chord does not belong in a particular spot, then it's questionable too, so that, in other words, the program is analyzing every possible thing it can, but it only takes one piece, one of the works. So, for example, if you're trying to create a Chopin mazurka, say, there are 56 roughly, depending on the situation, depending on which ones you count and which ones Chopin would count, and that's all a matter of opinion. And everything before and after is analyzed in terms of distance away. What is the cadence going to be? What is the final cadence going to be? I mean, it is a perfect example of how you need as much data as you can possibly get, so everything doesn't sound the same in the output, because it's the same sort of form. And is that an answer to your question?
Yeah. So now my flip side question is, like, how do you translate into David Cope music? Because you don't have a mazurka as a template. Is that what you were describing earlier, that you work from your sketch and try to encode like grammatical sort of points, or is the system now sort of know enough that you can just put in a very sort of like highlight sort of reel of arrival points, and it then works from there?
So you're assuming that I heard myself. That time I didn't. Okay. You're assuming that I use the program when I'm writing my own music as Emmy would, and not. I don't use Emmy or anything else. I just use my Lisp skills to do it. I want to hear this first run, and I will allow that first run or not allow it, just depending on my ears and how it sounds, how rough it may be for the violinist to play it. And I'll get a violin, for example, and try to play it myself, which isn't usually very good, but I can at least tell, like this. But there's no information in it. It doesn't work like that. I mean, I'm just writing code on the fly so I can get my music to sound like my music. So it's really a tool rather than, I like to think of it as a composer, but it's really just a simple tool that I use. And so I can usually write the tool in a couple of minutes and then run it a few times, then change a few things and then run it a few times. Is that helpful?
Yeah. So it's not corpus based. It's not, you didn't like feed in your own music as you sort of postulated doing back in the day. Okay.
Not at all.
Does your
when I'm composing, after I draw the the algorithm, I put it aside or stand it on a music stand, and so I can see it quickly. And then I say I want to hear that, and I write the code to hear that, which is fairly quick. And then play it back a few times and say, well, this is not working, that was not working, so forth. My wife's a piano teacher, and so she's downstairs with the piano, and I'm up here in the second floor. And as a result, I don't have a piano to work with. And I can't stand, what do you call those things? Keyboards, I guess. Electronic keyboard things. They just don't make it for me physically. And so I tend to just use Lisp and the MIDI output.
Isn't that akin to, Doug, isn't that akin to TWEL or what he's talking about in terms of tools? I don't know why.
Billy, there's an echo in your.
Yeah. Is it better now? Okay, my volume was too loud. I'm just going through the system here. A little echo. Okay. Yeah, I was just saying it sounds akin to TWEL. That has this box of different algorithms that you can use, maybe modeling different techniques. I mean, do you think of things like different principles, for instance, either ones that gone through. I don't know why names are escaping. Let's say 18th century counterpoint. You wanted a certain thing that maybe resembled that, or something with part writing when you're doing your algorithms. Those are the ideas. Grasp a certain sound, or let's say drums. I've been working with the drum patch. I mean, in terms of how intervals move, and then feeding it into something else to create a certain kind of sound.
No.
I think he's asking.
I'm not sure what else to say, because again, about a third of what you said was impossible to translate on this end.
Yeah, I think he's asking whether you have any particular algorithmic tools that you're deploying when you write this code that are you've already fabricated something that does counterpoint, handles part writing, those sort of things.
No. Nothing. Yep.
Nothing like Lorenz attractors, like Lorenz or fractals or anything that has been converted into music.
I certainly have those, but I don't use them for music most of the time. I use them when I'm writing books and when I'm doing art, algorithmic art. But I don't use them in music that much. Particularly in art. I love visual art from my youth, the 7 years I spent in art school. And I love to do, I draw all the time when I'm relaxing, which is never. And essentially the the work gets done, and now I'm getting real good feedback from myself. It's lapsing behind. But if I understand your question right, I do write lots and lots of small, programs that do various things. For example, you're right in writing counterpoint, for example. I actually did one of those things for my students. This was quite a while ago. Haven't done so again since. The idea was that this program would simply learn how to write it by itself. And it does great work. I mean, it never goes wrong. After it experiments for 5 or 6 times, it will write a perfect, if you give it a canis firmus, and then say, here are the rules. It will, in fact, attempt, make a mistake, put it in the memory, mistake, memory, mistake, memory, mistake, memory, right. Oh, good, right. Let's do that from now on. Not the exact same piece, but follow that. But that probably is going to still give you wrong once in a while. But within 2 minutes, the thing is writing perfect. Gratis ad parnassum kinds of counterpoint, vocal counterpoint. Is that getting to the point? But it's not part of Emmy or anybody else. It's just something. I'll usually write an article for CMJ about it or something else. There is one about that. And so, Carlos, I think I'm not sure what else I can say.
Well, basically, I was wondering, so could you give an example of like a small tool that you use then is it in terms of an arc? I mean, how could you describe like in terms of a musical principle or something that you relate to? Is it a combination that's entirely personal that's translated into the Lisp?
Well, everything translates into Lisp. Absolutely. But I'm still not quite understanding. I mean, fundamentally, I write something. If I want to write something for an article, I write something for an article, and I usually pick something that, well, we had a program here called, it's been, we've what's it called? You think I'd know that. Anyway, we taught a workshop very similar to the workshop that John Chowning had, and I think still has, or not he, because he's retired, but others have continued at Stanford, in which, oh my God, now I've even forgotten that. I'm getting old. In any event, I'm writing for a particular kind of article or part of my book that I'm writing at that particular point, and so forth. And it has a value to me in the sense that it demonstrates a way to do something without going to deep learning or ANNs or any other kind of, AI kind of approach. It's just simply a logical way to go about doing things. Save your things that went wrong, and if you save enough of them, you'll always get it right. But I tried my students with it. I said, I'll give you the algorithm, okay? So you can always get your assignments right, and nobody came near to it. But this is a long time ago, so maybe they would now. But there was probably a fear of computers at that particular point. This is back in the 1980s. I don't know. But I'm sorry, I probably haven't come close to, I don't use them. I do write often things out of curiosity. I'm a great lover of House, a TV show that probably nobody here has seen, but I have seen every episode at least 10 times.
I have seen every episode. It's amazing.
Oh, it's an amazing show. And in any event, I adore it. I watch it every day. I can't go to sleep unless I've watched my episode of House. And his beautifully done thing is that he just doesn't care about life and death and everything else. This is a show, for those of you who don't know about it, is a medical show, but unlike any other medical show that I've ever seen, in which the guy is completely crazy, but he is brilliant at coming up with diagnostics for his patients. So he only accepts patients which have something impossible to diagnose problem. And so it's great to watch him. But his lifelong, that's what his life is. Everything that's easy to solve, he's not interested in. Even if it will save somebody's life, he can give it to somebody else. What he's really interested in is one thing. It produces a problem, a puzzle, as he calls it, and he has to solve that puzzle. And he usually does. Unfortunately, he has a personality that is not well thought of in terms of whether the patient dies or not. I mean, he really is a strange bird, or being played by as a strange bird, and it's glorious. And I swear to God, I learn from that show every time I watch it, even if I've watched it 10 times. It's beautifully done.
I guess I mean, I'm still just trying to draw at what is the content of what you are coding. I mean, what is it coming from? What is the inspiration within coding? I mean, I can give you an example from a piece that I did. I have not done algorithmic composition law, I mean, at all. That's why what puts me in this class. I'm not even in school. I'm just learning from, Doc.
Sure.
And I had taken a class with him before in PWGL, and now I'm learning Max. But I'm saying, for instance, I put together a sequence of patches for a project that I did for him that ended up being a quartet of clarinet and violin, viola, cello. Mm-hmm. And I started my premise with, there was a scale that the arc of the scale I liked, a non-atonic scale. But I'd worked with, I'm a jazz musician and play Brazilian music, whatever. But the thing is, I had studied exotic scales at one time, and there were scales that had always intrigued me. Just the combination of pitches touched me, got inside of me in a certain way. So I decided to use that collection of pitches and then put them through a number of variations of different musical principles that I liked and see how that hit me. And then after that, I came up with a logical sequence, maybe formed by my ear, my intuition. And I went from, let's say, mensural canons, which I got. Right. I went into a first species counterpoint. I'm just listing some things that it went. Then there was a grammar with constraints where I used rhythms, where I used Cuban rhythms mixed into this non-atonic thing where I fed those in. So I had certain content of musical ideas that touched me in my life as a performer. And I tried to take those elements and combine them and create a piece. And through the different patches and things that I studied, I thereby produced a piece. So I was just curious in terms of what is the stuff of your composition? What is it that you're coding? What's going in? What is your inspiration that draws you to the piece? What is the content? I mean, we can say meaning or the underlying, it doesn't have to be narrative, but there's some kind of psychic content, feeling, things that don't necessarily have language. That's how I look at it very often.
Right. Well, I generally start from the fact that there's a problem and I have to diagnose it. That's why I brought House into the problem. Uh-huh. Essentially, I am just like him in that sense. Even though he's a character in a TV show, that there's some kind of a problem that I can't solve. So I'm going to solve it. And that's what it is. And when I'm writing music, I write what I like. I mean, I sketch my algorithm, my visual sort of written out drawing of an algorithm is fundamentally what I think I would like. I would be singing along with it. and I would be hearing it in my head. And I like this. I don't think of rules in the slightest. I don't think of the history of where this comes from. I simply want to like it. And when I do, then I start experimenting with the MIDI, and sooner or later it comes together somehow. It's all very intuitive. It's not something that I start off with with an end in mind. I mean, I do top down, and I do. Yeah, it's difficult to describe because, I mean, essentially, if I were to start a piece right now, which is what I used to do in the workshop we had, WACM, by the way, is the name of it, WACM, for Workshop in Algorithmic Computer Music, acronym. And generally, I would write a piece for orchestra of not less than 5 minutes from scratch for the students to see how I worked. And I'd work out loud, that is verbally, so they could hear my thoughts as I went through. And if you were there at a particular one of those kinds of things, I mean, at the end, I would play it for them, and they would hear what I had in mind. But essentially, it was, I think that I want to begin this way, or I think that I want the movement to end this way, or whatever. And I'll draw something out to do that, and draw something out to do that. See, I'm even doing my visual algorithm right there. And then I look at it and I see, yeah, maybe I should tell you this. Notes, this will sound bizarre, but it's true. In the stream of various things that we have, tempo, rhythm, harmony, and all these things, pitches are probably the least important to me. What's most important on my list is dynamics. Because I could scare the poop out of you if I went, "Mah!" I didn't scare the poop out of you. Some of you didn't even look up, but you know, dynamics are one of the most important things in language, and they're one of the most important things in music, for sure. And yet, if you go to a concert or a string quartets and so forth, the last thing they're paying attention to is that. And then, to me, second would be rhythm. I mean, how many know that it isn't triplets before Beethoven's Fifth Symphony when it starts? It's not da 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 da. That's what I hear most of the time, da 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 da. This is previewing into the last note of the four, right? So it's not da 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 da, or it's not da 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 da. It's da 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 da. I have never heard that before in my life. But if you look at the score and you believe in meter and where the accents are, by God, the dynamics are extraordinarily important. And I have a feeling that Beethoven would be disgusted with the way that even the great conductors conduct his Fifth Symphony, one of the most, known pieces on the planet. Da-da-da-dum. That's the way it should be, or maybe I'm exaggerating it because I've done this in front of classes so often. But dynamics, rhythm, meter, articulation, those are the things that matter. Because, in language, for example, when I'm talking to you now, or you were talking to me, and so forth, when we're talking to each other, we use dynamics a lot. We use them a lot. And we heard the word so many times. How many times have you heard an A? How many times have you heard a C sharp? For heaven's sakes, or something microtonal? Probably not as much. But to me, those things are there, and I like melodies and I like harmonies. But for me, it's the rest of the stuff that really makes music happen.
Would you say that you gain influence from music in other countries and continents? Would say like probably the impact of drums from like West Africa or like
Yeah.
the I'm trying to
Well, the
think.
drums in West Africa are amazing
Yeah,
because they do understand the meaning of dynamics and the meaning. It's a language to them.
Yeah, because I went to Ghana 2 years ago for a study abroad and learned about drum language, and it was insane. It was
Oh,
like
yeah.
Morse code before it was Morse code. So I wanted to ask because you said you went to a university in China,
Well,
right?
I was on their list. Yes, I'm on their list. I don't go to
Was
China
as far as like
recently, at least.
well, was there any? Would you say there's any Pacific country or continent that you received not well, like gained like like inspiration from as far as dynamics, or it was just like it doesn't matter at all, like where you hear things from, like
It doesn't matter at all.
doesn't matter at all.
I just love them. It matters to the degree that I'd like to give them credit in some ways, but yes, I just expect that whatever I hear, it's gonna sometime or another come out in my music. It has to. Where else do these things come from? But what we hear, just like I'm finishing a book right now, and it's about how to write novels with computers. Okay, it's called computer generated novels, something like that. Really great title, but there is no other book. The publishers are asking me, what else is there out there that you think would be competition? Well, the answer is nothing.
That's true.
I mean, nothing. Look on YouTube and you'll see some people who've tried to do this, and they're all laughing themselves silly because it's so stupid. And I've spent the last 7 years working on this, and it is producing it. There's 10 published books by the program out there named Alma, a woman's name again. And I learn by listening. I don't know what's happening in my brain, and I'd rather have it that way.
Yeah.
Kind of strange, but I'd rather have it that way. And the things come out occasionally, and I say, "Oh my goodness! I spent that many months in Bali back in 1989, and that's where that was influenced by." And I should give them a little bit of credit somewhere in the score, or maybe the recordings that come out in their liner notes, whatever, performances.
Yeah, because like nowadays when it comes to like music, from what I'm hearing mostly, it's like there's no, like you said, there's no credit giving towards other cultures as much, because everything's mostly, I mean, it's sample based, but it's like literally taking basic instead of like inspiration, let alone form of like ideas from what they heard and everything.
Yeah.
And so I asked the question because in regards to computer music, it's mostly with algorithms and coding and stuff with synthesis and everything that, we're able to make certain and generate certain noises and stuff instead of like actually being authentic when it comes to dynamics and timbre and stuff. We could just be like, oh, I could just get like a H5 recorder mic and just actually record it and put it into the track instead of actually getting insight and ideas as to where, like, how did they be able to have those pulses like that with the drums? Is it like the texture, material of the drums?
Yeah.
How can I make it sounds similar to it without actually like, give me that. That's mine. Putting it in my pocket, you know, like putting it into the session and stuff.
Yeah.
And everything. So I want to ask that and stuff. So
Yeah. Good question.
I think we are basically out of time. It's 2:00 Eastern Standard now, and so we've gone 90 minutes, and I feel like, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, we should have a week-long workshop. But in the interim, given what's going on, that's not possible. But this has been really, really informative, really spectacular. And thank you, David, for coming and speaking. And I want to thank everybody for joining us and hanging out, those of you who are in the class and everyone else too. And if people are interested more in David's work, he mentioned that he has written several books on his music. He's published articles in the Computer Music Journal. There are many CDs and available recordings of his music out there as well. Is there anything, David, that you would like to particularly point the students to as a starter, or to listen to, or to read?
Well, I would suggest that you do go to YouTube and listen. There's 356 or whatever, one for each day of the year, and they are mostly results of Emmy's work. There's and they're partials because they're sort of in it. Well, but there are some that are full performances. A lot of music up there, and probably about 1 million listens to so far. That's where I point you, because I put each one of them up there. They have a video background, which I also did for each one of them. And I did them one a day for 365 straight days.
Wow.
Which was great fun. I got very good at at somebody else's algorithms, which were, you know, helping me do the stuff. Of the things that I've listened to most, there's one by Emily Howell. I don't know what it's called. I mean, there's thousands of pieces that I have around here. And those are the ones that I thought were somewhat useful and interesting. Books. Actually, I've written over 150 books at this stage of my life. And I keep doing it. Right now am struggling to finish this nonfiction book so that I could start another novel that I will have written, and then go back to the violin concerto. I am CO, isn't it OC? OC. What does that stand for?
Is
Anybody
it
know what
OG?
OC stands for?
OG, like the
OC.
original?
Oh, obsessive compulsive.
Obsessive compulsive. There you go. And I am definitely that. And I work fundamentally about 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I am married for 53 years, and my wife understands this thing that I go through, and I make reservations for things like this if I feel that they are honest and interested. And there's only 5 of you at the present time, but it doesn't matter for me if there's 1,000 or 1. I love working. I just love it. I'll give it a big kiss.
That I think is a key to a happy life, is to find ways
It is.
to do the work you love doing and be able to financially make it to the other end. You know,
Yep.
it's a gift if you can make that happen in your life. It really is.
Well, I guess I got a gift then, because yeah, I love teaching, and I love everything I do. I mean, it's, my wife may not at times because I'm not taking out the garbage or something. But I got a chance to take her. She's got a problem with vertigo, Meniere's disease. If you don't know what that is, that's something that, so I'm helping her, and it's a lifelong thing. So she will have this going on for the rest of her life, probably, unless there's some kind of a solution found medically. But she's worth it. So anyway, I appreciate you for listening to me blather on, and I might have, if I've helped you in some way, I'm delighted. I hope I didn't turn you off to anything. I would not be delighted about that.
Okay.
I'll stop talking.
Fabulous. Well, thanks for giving us the time, and best of luck with all the work you're doing. And hopefully we'll see you at another time, maybe a concert or festival or something in the future. But thanks again for your time.
Right.
Thanks for being with us today.
Well, be safe. Be safe. Okay? I
Okay.
want to see all of you again. Okay?
All right.
You're great people, all of you.
Thanks, everyone.